The first gunshot shattered the peaceful Montana evening just as Elizabeth Harmon's water broke, signaling the start of what would become the longest night of her life. She clutched her swollen belly and dropped to her knees on the rough wooden floor of her small cabin, pain radiating through her body in waves that threatened to pull her under completely. Outside, the shouts and war cries of the Blackfoot raiding party grew closer, and Elizabeth knew with sickening certainty that her husband James wouldn't be coming back through that door. It had been just moments earlier when James had grabbed his rifle and rushed out to defend their homestead on the outskirts of Eureka, Montana. "Stay inside and bar the door," he told her, his face tight with worry. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Now, as another contraction seized her body, Elizabeth knew she was completely alone, about to bring new life into the world while death circled outside her door. The sound of hoofbeats approaching fast made her blood run cold. She dragged herself toward the shotgun James kept loaded by the bed, determined to protect her unborn child with her last breath if necessary. But before she could reach it, the cabin door burst open, and a tall figure silhouetted against the fading light stood in the doorway. "Madam, anyone alive in here?" The voice belonged to a stranger, a man who stepped inside cautiously, rifle at the ready. His eyes widened when he saw Elizabeth on the floor. "Good Lord!" "The baby!" Elizabeth gasped, another contraction stealing her breath. "It's coming now." Lucas Reed had been driving cattle to Eureka when he spotted the smoke and heard the gunfire. The former Texas Ranger had intended only to pass through this northern Montana town, just another stop on his wandering path since the war had ended 5 years ago. The year 1870 was supposed to be a fresh start, taking a herd to sell up north before winter set in. Instead, he found himself kneeling beside a woman in labor as hostile warriors circled a homestead. "I'm Lucas Reed, madam. I'm going to help you," he said, quickly barring the door behind him. His weathered face showed concern as he assessed the situation. "Is there anyone else here?" Elizabeth shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "My husband James, he went out to fight them off. I heard—" She couldn't finish the sentence as another contraction hit. Lucas moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. In the fading light, he could see several bodies on the ground. One was unmistakably a white settler, lying motionless near the barn. He'd seen enough death to know the man wouldn't be getting up again. Farther out, at least a dozen mounted warriors were regrouping, apparently preparing for another assault. "We've got to move you somewhere safer," Lucas said, turning back to Elizabeth. "I can't," she gasped. "The baby, it's coming now." Lucas ran a hand through his dark hair, his blue eyes scanning the cabin. He'd delivered foals and calves, but never a human baby. Yet something in Elizabeth's determined face reminded him of his younger sister back in Texas. The same spirit. He couldn't let her face this alone. "All right," he said, making a quick decision. "We'll make do. I'll defend this place till help comes or they give up." He moved furniture against the door and windows, creating makeshift barricades. "What's your name, madam?" "Elizabeth Harmon," she managed between breaths. "Most people call me Eliza." "Eliza, I need you to trust me," Lucas said, kneeling beside her. "I've never delivered a baby before, but I'm not leaving you." Through the window came the unmistakable sound of war cries as the Blackfoot warriors began their next approach. Lucas positioned himself by the window with his Winchester rifle, then glanced back at the brave woman preparing to bring a new life into the world amid such danger. "I'll keep you safe," he promised. "Both of you." Elizabeth nodded through her pain, somehow finding strength in this stranger's calm assurance. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, the attack began in earnest as the first arrows thudded into the cabin walls. Lucas fired methodically through the narrow opening in the shutters, each shot carefully placed. He'd been in tight spots before, but nothing quite like this. Between shots, he could hear Elizabeth's labored breathing behind him, punctuated by occasional cries of pain that tore at something deep inside him. "They're trying to surround us," he told her, hoping conversation might distract her from the pain. "But they won't risk a direct assault yet." "Not while I'm picking them off." "How many?" Elizabeth asked through gritted teeth. "Maybe 10, 12 left. Hard to tell in this light." Lucas reloaded his rifle. "Don't you worry about them. You just focus on that baby." Another contraction hit Elizabeth, stronger than before. She cried out, clutching the edge of the bed she was leaning against. Lucas turned, concern etched on his face. The twilight was deepening, and he knew they'd need more light soon. "There are lanterns," Elizabeth gasped, as if reading his thoughts, "on the shelf, and matches on the mantel." Lucas moved quickly to light 2 oil lanterns, placing one near Elizabeth and keeping the other by the window where he continued his vigil. The warm glow illuminated the simple cabin: a wooden table with 4 chairs, a small cooking area, a rocking chair with knitting still in progress. Signs of a life being built, now threatened on all sides. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, eyes scanning the perimeter outside. 2 years, Elizabeth replied, her voice strained. "James brought us out from Illinois after the war. Said Montana had opportunities for a man willing to work hard." Her voice broke. "He was building us a bigger house for when the baby came." Lucas nodded, not knowing what to say. He'd seen too many dreams end this way in the frontier territories. "Your husband must have been a brave man." "He was," Elizabeth said softly. Then her face contorted with another contraction. "It's getting stronger," she gasped. Lucas fired twice more as shadowy figures darted between the trees at the edge of the clearing. One fell while the others retreated. The cabin grew quiet except for Elizabeth's labored breathing. "I think they are regrouping," Lucas said, using the moment of respite to check on her. "How are you holding up?" Elizabeth's face was flushed, her hair damp with sweat. I need to push soon," she managed. Lucas swallowed hard, realizing the moment of truth was approaching faster than he'd anticipated. "What do you need me to do?" "There's clean linens in that chest," she directed, pointing weakly. "And water. We need boiled water." Lucas moved quickly, stoking the small wood stove and putting a pot of water to boil. He retrieved the linens, then returned to the window to check the perimeter. The Blackfoot seemed to be holding back for now, perhaps waiting for full darkness. "Why are they attacking?" Elizabeth asked as he helped position her more comfortably on a blanket spread near the fire. "Raids have been increasing lately," Lucas explained, keeping his voice steady. "The treaties aren't worth the paper they're written on. Governments pushing them off their lands, starving them out. Some bands are fighting back the only way they know how." Elizabeth nodded, understanding in her eyes despite her pain. "James always said we should try to live peacefully with them. He traded with some friendly tribes." Her voice caught. "He wasn't a man who looked for trouble." "Trouble finds folks out here, whether they're looking for it or not," Lucas said grimly. He'd seen too much of the frontier's brutal reality to sugarcoat it. "That's why I keep moving. Never stay in one place long enough for trouble to catch up." A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from Lucas's head. He ducked instinctively, then returned fire, downing one of the attackers who had crept closer under cover of darkness. "They're getting bolder," he muttered, reloading quickly. Elizabeth cried out, a sound different from before. "The baby, it's coming now," she gasped. "I need to push." Lucas found himself torn between defending the cabin and helping Elizabeth. Another shot rang out, followed by the thud of an arrow embedding itself in the door. "Hold on," he told her, firing 3 rapid shots that sent the nearest attackers scrambling for cover. Then he moved to her side, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. "Tell me what to do," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Just be ready to catch the baby," Elizabeth said, her voice stronger now despite her exhaustion. "And keep talking to me. I need to know I'm not alone." Lucas nodded, positioning himself where he could both assist her and keep an eye on the windows. "You're not alone, Eliza," he said softly. "I'm right here." As the night deepened around the isolated cabin, the battle continued on two fronts. Outside, the Blackfoot warriors pressed their attack with increasing determination. Inside, Elizabeth fought her own battle to bring new life into the world. Lucas moved between the windows, firing whenever a target presented itself, then returning to Elizabeth's side. He spoke to her constantly, telling her about the Texas ranch where he grew up, about his time as a ranger, about the cattle drive that had brought him north, anything to keep her focused and fighting. "Almost there," Elizabeth gasped after what seemed like hours, her face contorted with effort. "I can feel the head." Lucas knelt beside her, rifle within reach, as she gave one final, tremendous push. The baby slid into his waiting hands, tiny, slippery, and miraculously alive. "It's a boy," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion as the infant let out a lusty cry that seemed to fill the entire cabin. "You have a son, Eliza." Tears streamed down Elizabeth's face as Lucas wrapped the newborn in clean linen and placed him in her arms. For a moment, the gunfire and danger outside faded away as mother and child gazed at each other for the first time. "Hello, William," she whispered, touching the baby's tiny face. "William James Harmon." The tender moment was shattered by a crash against the door. The attackers were attempting to break in. Lucas grabbed his rifle and fired through a crack, hearing a cry of pain as his bullet found its mark. "They're getting desperate," he said, checking his ammunition. "Dawn can't be far off. If we can hold out till then." Elizabeth clutched her newborn tighter. "We will," she said with quiet determination. "We have to." Lucas looked at her, this woman who had just endured childbirth in the midst of an attack, who had lost her husband hours ago, yet still found the strength to fight for her child's future, and felt something shift inside him. Something he'd thought long buried after years of wandering. "Yes, madam," he said with newfound resolve. "We certainly will." The night wore on, each hour stretching into what felt like an eternity. Lucas maintained his vigilance, moving from window to window, firing when necessary, conserving ammunition when possible. The Blackfoot warriors, realizing they faced a skilled opponent, became more cautious but refused to withdraw. Elizabeth recovered her strength remarkably quickly, nursing baby William and even insisting on helping Lucas reload his weapons. "I grew up with 4 brothers," she explained when he looked surprised. "My father made sure I could handle a gun." As they worked side by side in the lamplight, Lucas found himself studying her face, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the tenderness when she looked at her son. Despite everything she'd lost that night, there was no self-pity, only resilience. "Your husband would be proud," Lucas said quietly as she handed him freshly loaded cartridges. "Of both of you." Elizabeth's eyes welled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "James wanted this child so badly," she whispered. "He was so happy when we found out." She looked down at the sleeping infant. "At least part of him will live on." "What will you do?" Lucas asked. "After this is over?" Elizabeth's expression hardened slightly. "Survive," she said simply. "Raise my son. This is our land, James, and I worked too hard for me to abandon it." Lucas was about to respond when a movement outside caught his eye. "They're pulling back," he said, peering through the window. The warriors were retreating toward the tree line, gathering in what appeared to be a council. "Is it over?" Elizabeth asked hopefully. Lucas shook his head. I don't think so. They're planning something. He checked his ammunition. We've got maybe 20 rounds left, not enough if they make a concentrated rush. The first hint of dawn was lightening the eastern sky, but it offered little comfort. In the growing light, Lucas could see that the cabin was surrounded with at least 8 warriors still active. They had positioned themselves strategically, cutting off all possible escape routes. They know they've got us trapped, Lucas said grimly. They're just deciding how to finish it. Elizabeth's face paled, but she squared her shoulders. Then we make them pay dearly for it, she said, reaching for the shotgun. Lucas nodded, admiring her courage. We'll make a stand right here, he agreed. But first, he hesitated, then continued. There's something I need to do. He moved to the small writing desk in the corner, quickly penning a note on a scrap of paper. When he finished, he folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. What is that? Elizabeth asked. Just some things that need saying in case I don't get another chance, Lucas replied. My full name, where I'm from, the circumstances here, he glanced at her, so people will know what happened, that you and your boy didn't die alone. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to stay, she whispered. You could try to slip away, get help. Lucas shook his head firmly. I'm not leaving you, Eliza. Not now. Their eyes met across the room, a moment of understanding passing between them that needed no words. Then William stirred, letting out a small cry, and the spell was broken. He's hungry again, Elizabeth said, moving to tend to her son. Lucas turned back to the window, giving her privacy. Outside, the warriors were mounting their horses, preparing for what looked to be a final assault. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. They're coming, he warned. 8 of them, riding hard. Elizabeth hurriedly finished nursing William and placed him in a small drawer she'd padded with blankets, the safest place she could improvise. Stay here, little one, she murmured, kissing his forehead before joining Lucas at the windows, shotgun in hand. Aim low when they get close, Lucas instructed her. Don't waste shots on anything farther than 30 yards. Elizabeth nodded, her hand steady on the weapon. Together, they watched as the Blackfoot warriors charged across the open ground, war cries filling the air as they closed in on the cabin. Lucas fired methodically, dropping one rider, then another. Beside him, Elizabeth waited until the attackers were almost upon them before discharging the shotgun with a deafening boom. The spread caught a warrior full in the chest, knocking him from his horse. But it wasn't enough. The remaining warriors reached the cabin, dismounting to attack from all sides. An arrow flew through the window, narrowly missing Elizabeth. Lucas fired his last bullets as axes began to splinter the door. Get behind me, Lucas ordered, drawing his hunting knife as the door began to give way. Elizabeth stood her ground beside him, the empty shotgun now clutched like a club. The door crashed open, and a warrior burst through, tomahawk raised. Lucas met him head-on, blocking the strike and driving his knife home. Another attacker appeared at the window, and Elizabeth swung the shotgun butt with all her might, connecting with a satisfying crack. But they were outnumbered, and Lucas knew it was only a matter of moments before they would be overwhelmed. He positioned himself in front of Elizabeth, determined to sell his life dearly. The lead warrior stepped through the doorway, tall and imposing with feathers adorning his hair. He raised his hand, and surprisingly, the attack paused. His dark eyes assessed Lucas coldly, then moved to Elizabeth and the makeshift cradle where William lay crying. The child is new, the warrior said in accented English, surprise evident in his voice. Born this night. Elizabeth stepped forward, despite Lucas's attempt to keep her behind him. Yes, she said firmly. My son was born during your attack. My husband is dead. Will you kill a newborn child and his mother too? The warrior's eyes narrowed, but something like uncertainty crossed his face. He spoke rapidly in his native tongue to his companions, several of whom looked toward the baby with evident discomfort. "What's happening?" Lucas whispered to Elizabeth. "I don't know," she replied, not taking her eyes off the Blackfoot leader. After what seemed an eternity, the warrior addressed them again. "A child born in battle has strong medicine," he said slowly. "It is bad fortune to harm such a one." He pointed to William. "His spirit called to be born in the midst of death. He will be a bridge between worlds." Lucas maintained his defensive stance, not trusting this sudden change. "So you're just going to leave?" he asked skeptically. The warrior's face hardened. "We came for horses and supplies. The white man's government sends promises, not food. Our children hunger." His eyes moved to the window, where the first true light of dawn was breaking. "But we will not take from a new mother or harm one touched by spirits." He barked an order, and his men began to withdraw. The leader himself was the last to leave, pausing at the threshold. "Tell others what happened here," he said. "Tell them Yellow Wolf showed mercy when he found new life." With that, he was gone. Lucas rushed to the window, watching in disbelief as the Blackfoot mounted their horses and rode toward the tree line. "They're really leaving," he said, amazement in his voice. Elizabeth sank to her knees beside William's makeshift cradle, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank God," she whispered, gathering her son into her arms. "Thank God." Lucas went to her side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now, both of you." As the sun rose fully over the Montana landscape, casting long shadows across the battle-scarred homestead, Lucas and Elizabeth sat in exhausted silence, the miracle of their survival slowly sinking in. William slept peacefully in his mother's arms, blissfully unaware of the night of terror that had marked his entry into the world, or the bond that had formed between the two adults who had fought so desperately to protect him. The days following the attack were a blur of activity. Neighbors from nearby homesteads arrived by mid-morning, alerted by the sounds of gunfire during the night. They helped bury James Harmon and the fallen Blackfoot warriors, repaired the damaged cabin, and brought supplies for Elizabeth and her newborn. Lucas found himself unable to leave, despite his usual instinct to move on quickly. He told himself it was concern for Elizabeth's safety that he couldn't abandon a new mother and infant so soon after such trauma. But deep down, he recognized it was more than that. Something about Elizabeth Harmon's courage and determination had awakened feelings he'd long thought dormant. "You don't have to stay, you know," Elizabeth said one evening, about a week after William's birth. They were sitting on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "The Thompsons offered to let me stay with them until I decide what to do next." Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Do you want me to go?" he asked directly. Elizabeth studied him thoughtfully. "No," she admitted after a moment. "I don't. But I won't hold you here out of obligation either, Lucas Reed. I know men like you're not used to staying in one place." "Men like me," Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Restless souls," Elizabeth clarified. "Always looking toward the horizon, never quite finding what you're searching for." Her insight struck uncomfortably close to home. Lucas had been wandering for 5 years since the war ended, taking jobs as they came, never settling anywhere for long. "Maybe what I've been looking for wasn't on any horizon," he said quietly. Their eyes met briefly before Elizabeth looked away, a flush coloring her cheeks. "I should check on William," she said, rising from her chair. Lucas watched her go, confused by the emotions churning inside him. Elizabeth was a recent widow with a newborn child. She needed protection and support, not complications. And yet, with each passing day, he found himself more drawn to her strength, her intelligence, her gentle way with William, even her stubborn insistence on maintaining her independence despite her vulnerable position. The next morning, Lucas rode into Eureka to send telegrams to his former employers, informing them he wouldn't be continuing north with the cattle drive. He also purchased supplies and inquired discreetly about the Blackfoot situation in the area. "Tensions are high," the storekeeper told him as he loaded Lucas's purchases. "Army's promising to send more troops, but you know how that goes. Bunch of broken promises is what got us here in the first place." "Yellow Wolf," Lucas said. "You know of him," the storekeeper nodded grimly. "Respected warrior, from what I hear. Not usually one for random attacks, though. They must be desperate." Lucas thought about what the Blackfoot leader had said about hungry children. It wasn't hard to understand why they'd resorted to raiding, though he couldn't condone the deaths of innocent settlers. On his way back to the Harmon homestead, Lucas passed James's grave site on the small hill overlooking the property. He stopped, feeling compelled to say something to the man whose place he had inadvertently taken. "I'll look after them," he promised quietly. "For as long as they need me, you have my word." As the weeks passed, Lucas found himself settling into life at the homestead. He repaired the barn, tended the small herd of cattle James had been raising, and began work on the larger house James had started building before his death. Elizabeth objected at first, insisting she couldn't ask so much of him, but Lucas was determined. "Winter's coming," he pointed out reasonably. "That cabin's too small for comfort in Montana weather. Besides, it's good to keep busy." What he didn't say was how right it felt to be building something permanent for once, instead of just passing through. How satisfying it was to watch the framework rise, knowing it would shelter Elizabeth and William through many winters to come. For her part, Elizabeth gradually adjusted to her new reality. The grief over James came in waves, sometimes catching her unawares as she went about daily tasks. But William's constant needs kept her focused on the present, and Lucas's steady presence provided a security she hadn't expected to find again so soon. "He looks like you," Lucas commented one afternoon as he watched Elizabeth rock William to sleep. The baby was nearly a month old now, growing stronger every day. "You think so?" Elizabeth looked down at her son thoughtfully. "I see James in him around the eyes especially." "Maybe," Lucas conceded, "but he has your determination, the way he fusses until he gets exactly what he wants." Elizabeth laughed softly. "Are you calling me stubborn, Mr. Reed?" "Determined," Lucas corrected with a smile. "It's a quality I admire." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of the growing attachment that neither had been willing to name. Elizabeth looked away first, gently placing the sleeping William in his cradle. "Lucas," she said hesitantly, "I need to ask you something." "Anything," he replied, instantly alert to the seriousness in her tone. "Why are you really staying?" She faced him directly, her eyes searching his. "Is it just because you feel responsible for us?" "Because if that's the case, it's not," Lucas interrupted. He took a deep breath, knowing it was time for honesty. "I'm staying because I want to be here, Eliza, because in all my years of wandering I've never felt as right as I do here with you and William." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. "But it's only been a month since James." "I know," Lucas said quickly. "And I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted you to know that my feelings go beyond obligation." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly uncertain. "If that makes you uncomfortable, I can leave. Find somewhere else nearby to stay, still help out but give you more space." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "I don't want you to leave, Lucas. That's what scares me." James has been gone just a month, and already I can't imagine this place without you in it." Tears welled in her eyes. "What kind of wife does that make me?" Lucas crossed the room to her, gently taking her hands in his. "A human one," he said softly. "Grief doesn't follow rules, Eliza. And neither does healing." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mingled in her gaze. "I need time," she whispered. "Time is something I have plenty of," Lucas assured her. "For the first time in my life, I'm not in any hurry to be somewhere else." The changing seasons mirrored the gradual transformation of the Harmon homestead. As summer faded into autumn, the new house took shape, larger and sturdier than the original cabin. Lucas added features he thought would please Elizabeth: extra windows to catch the morning light, a broader porch where they could sit in the evenings, a special room for William with space to grow. Elizabeth watched the construction with mixed emotions. The house represented a future she hadn't imagined just months ago, a future without James, but potentially with Lucas. The guilt she felt was complicated by her growing feelings for the quiet, steadfast man who had saved their lives and chosen to stay. "Mrs. Thompson says I should consider moving to town," Elizabeth mentioned one evening as they sat by the fire. William, now 3 months old, was sleeping peacefully nearby. "She thinks it's not proper, us living here alone together." Lucas looked up from the piece of harness he was repairing. "What do you think?" he asked carefully. Elizabeth sighed. "I think people will talk no matter what I do. If I stay, they'll gossip about us. If I go to town, they'll say I'm abandoning James's dream for this place." She met his eyes directly. "I'm more concerned with what's right for William. And for us." "And what do you think that is?" Lucas set aside his work, giving her his full attention. "I think." Elizabeth hesitated, gathering her courage. "I think we've been circling around something important for months now, something neither of us has been brave enough to name." Lucas's heart quickened. "And what's that?" "I care for you, Lucas," Elizabeth said softly. "More than I thought possible after losing James. Different than what I felt for him, but no less real." Lucas crossed the room to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Eliza," he said simply. "I think I have since that first night, watching you bring William into the world with such courage. I never believed I'd find a home again after the war, but I've found it here, with you." Tears spilled down Elizabeth's cheeks. "It still feels too soon," she whispered. "And yet, waiting feels like denying what we both know is true." Lucas gently wiped away her tears. "Then we don't rush and we don't wait. We just live each day honestly, building something together." He smiled. "I'm pretty good at building things these days." Elizabeth laughed softly, leaning forward until her forehead rested against his. "Yes, you are," she agreed. "And so am I." As autumn deepened toward winter, their relationship evolved naturally, no longer constrained by unspoken boundaries. Lucas moved his things into a small room off the kitchen, maintaining propriety while still being close. Together, they established a rhythm to their days, Lucas working the land and finishing the house, Elizabeth caring for William and managing the household. Word came from Eureka that the army had finally negotiated a fragile peace with the Blackfoot, though tensions remained high. No more raids were reported in their immediate area, but Lucas remained vigilant, never forgetting the night that had brought them together. The first heavy snow fell in early December, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse. Lucas and Elizabeth moved into the new house just days before, the larger space already feeling like home with furniture they had built together and curtains Elizabeth had sewn by lamplight. "It's perfect," Elizabeth said, standing in the main room as snow drifted past the windows. William, growing stronger every day, was propped up on a blanket, watching the fire with fascination. "Better than I ever imagined it could be." Lucas wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "There's just one thing missing," he said. "What's that?" Elizabeth asked, turning to look up at him. Instead of answering, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I've carried it since she died, just before the war. I always thought I'd know when it was right to pass it on." He took a deep breath. "Eliza Harmon, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Elizabeth stared at the ring, then at Lucas's face, the face that had become so dear to her over these past months. In his eyes she saw everything she needed: strength, kindness, unwavering devotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Lucas Reed, I will marry you." They were married on Christmas Eve in Eureka's small church, a simple ceremony attended by the few neighbors who could make the journey through the snow. William, dressed in a special outfit Elizabeth had made, watched with wide eyes as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," Elizabeth confessed that night as they stood on their porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. "After James died, I was just focused on survival." "Sometimes survival leads us to places we never expected to go," Lucas replied, drawing her close. "I was just passing through Montana, remember? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Elizabeth smiled up at him. "Yellow Wolf said William would be a bridge between worlds. I think he was right, but not in the way he meant. Our son bridged the gap between my old life and this new one. Between your wandering and finding home." Lucas kissed her gently. "Our son," he corrected. "From this day forward." Spring came early to Montana in 1871, bringing with it new beginnings. The land around the Reed homestead, as it was now known, burst into bloom, and Elizabeth's garden flourished under her careful tending. William took his first steps on the broad porch Lucas had built, tottering excitedly between his parents with delighted squeals. Lucas expanded their cattle operation, applying knowledge gained during his years as a drover to build a herd that would secure their future. Elizabeth's skills as a household manager ensured they wanted for nothing despite their relative isolation. It was during the summer that Elizabeth first suspected she was pregnant again. She kept the knowledge to herself for several weeks, savoring the private joy while watching Lucas with William. He was a natural father, patient and playful, teaching the toddler everything from how to pet the barn cats gently to the names of the wildflowers that dotted their property. "I have something to tell you," Elizabeth said one evening as they sat on the porch swing, William already asleep inside. The sunset painted the sky in vivid pinks and golds, a fitting backdrop for her news. Lucas turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it, love?" "We're going to have another baby," Elizabeth said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "In winter, I think." Lucas's face transformed with wonder and joy. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, then pulled her into a tender embrace. "Another child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Elizabeth asked, though she already knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Lucas assured her, his eyes shining with emotion. "You've given me everything I never knew I was searching for, Eliza. A home, a family, a purpose." As twilight deepened around them, they sat together in contented silence, the promise of their growing family filling the peaceful evening. So much had changed since that terrible night when William had entered the world amid violence and fear. Now, surrounded by love and security, they could look toward the future with confidence. Winter brought heavy snows to Eureka once again, but the Reed home remained warm and secure. The new baby, a girl they named Sarah, was born on a quiet December morning with none of the drama that had accompanied her brother's arrival. Lucas held her with tears in his eyes, marveling at the tiny, perfect features that seemed to combine the best of both her parents. "She's beautiful," he whispered, carefully transferring the swaddled infant to Elizabeth's waiting arms, just like her mother. William, now 18 months old, regarded his new sister with solemn curiosity. "Baby?" he asked, pointing a chubby finger. "Yes, sweetheart," Elizabeth confirmed. "This is your sister, Sarah. Can you say Sarah?" "Say wa," William attempted, bringing smiles to both parents' faces. "Close enough," Lucas chuckled, ruffling the boy's dark hair. As the family of four settled into their new dynamic, Elizabeth often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The loss and pain that had marked William's birth had given way to a happiness deeper and more profound than she could have imagined in those dark hours. Lucas, too, marveled at the transformation in his life. From solitary wanderer to husband and father of two, he had found a purpose and peace he'd never thought possible after the war's horrors. The nightmares that had once plagued him had largely subsided, replaced by dreams of his children's futures and the life he and Elizabeth were building together. Spring brought visitors to the Reed homestead, travelers heading west, who had heard stories of the night William was born and the Blackfoot warrior who had shown mercy because of it. Yellow Wolf's name had become known throughout the territory, symbolizing both the conflict between two worlds and the possibility of understanding across cultural divides. "You ever regret staying?" Elizabeth asked Lucas one evening as they watched the children play in the yard. William was now a sturdy 2-year-old, protective of his 6-month-old sister who watched his antics from a blanket in the grass. Lucas considered the question thoughtfully. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "Everything I've done, everywhere I've been, was just leading me here." He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "To you." Elizabeth leaned against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "I used to wonder why James and I were attacked that night," she confessed. "Why he had to die when we were just beginning our life together. It seemed so senseless, so cruel." "And now," Lucas prompted softly, "now I see that life doesn't always follow the path we expect," Elizabeth said. "There's pain and loss, yes, but also unexpected joy." She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "James will always be part of me, part of William. But this life we've built together is a gift I never imagined receiving." Lucas kissed her gently. "Every day with you and our children is a gift I cherish," he assured her, "and I intend to spend the rest of my days showing you just how grateful I am for it." As the years passed, the Reed homestead prospered, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the Eureka area. Lucas's knowledge of cattle breeding and Elizabeth's sharp business sense proved a formidable combination. They added another son, Michael, in 1874, completing their family. William grew into a thoughtful young man with an unusual sensitivity to both the settlers' concerns and the native people's struggles. True to Yellow Wolf's prediction, he often found himself bridging cultural divides, using his unique birth story to open conversations where others found only conflict. The night of William's birth became something of a legend in Montana territory, symbolizing both the dangers of frontier life and the unexpected mercy that could emerge from even the most desperate circumstances. Lucas and Elizabeth shared the story with their children when they were old enough to understand, emphasizing that courage and compassion could be found in unlikely places. In the autumn of 1890, 20 years after that fateful night, the Reed family gathered on the porch of the home Lucas had built. William, now a strong young man of 20, was preparing to leave for college in Denver, the first in the area to pursue higher education. "I want to study law," he explained to his parents. Maybe find ways to create fair treaties, better conditions for everyone in the territory. Lucas clasped his son's shoulder proudly. You'll make a difference, son. You already have. Elizabeth wiped away tears as she embraced her firstborn. You came into this world during the darkest night of my life, she told him, and brought with you more light than I ever thought possible. Sarah, now 18 and resembling her mother more with each passing year, hugged her brother fiercely. You better write to us, she demanded. Every week. I will, William promised, tugging one of her braids affectionately. 16-year-old Michael, the spitting image of Lucas, tried to maintain a stoic expression but finally gave in and hugged his older brother. The ranch won't be the same without you, he admitted. As twilight settled over the Montana landscape, Lucas and Elizabeth stood with their arms around each other, watching their children. From that terrifying night of violence and new life had grown a family bound by love, strength, and shared purpose. We did well, didn't we? Lucas murmured, pressing a kiss to Elizabeth's temple, now showing strands of silver among the brown. Elizabeth leaned into his embrace, as comfortable and right as it had been for 2 decades. Very well indeed, she agreed, and we're just getting started. As stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, the same stars that had witnessed their unlikely beginning, Lucas and Elizabeth Reed looked toward the future with the same courage and hope that had sustained them through that long-ago night. Their story, born in danger and desperation, had blossomed into a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of a Blackfoot warrior named Yellow Wolf nodded in approval at the bridge that had indeed been built between worlds, not through treaties or politics, but through one family's journey from darkness into light.